And welcome back. James Butler Hickok. Of course, he figures prominently in the history of Springfield. We're going to get a little bit deeper into it maybe and give you some of the facts and maybe things you didn't know as well about this man. And I've got the guy who knows it all when it comes to this, and that's John Sellers. I'm putting you on the spot.
Don't get carried away.
At the History Museum on the Square. Okay. James Butler Hickok. We all know him as Wild Bill Hickok.
Bill.
Where do you get that from, James Butler?
One of the stories is that he had very pronounced lips, and that kids at a young age would call him Duck Bill. And then as he got more to be more of a good shot and more easily agitated, they changed that to Wild Bill. I don't know that to be true, but that's the story.
It's a nice story.
That's a nice story.
And if you look at some of the pictures of him when he was younger, I mean, it kind of fits that a little
very
bit.
Very pronounced.
And if you know his history, you didn't call him Bill, Duck Bill,
not
very long.
No.
Yes.
Not
or else, there were consequences. All right, talk about his history here in Springfield.
He first came here in 1863 to work for the Provost Marshal. The city of Springfield was under martial law.
Okay.
And he was what they called the detective, which meant he was a patrolman here enforcing the law, because the military was the law in the city of Springfield.
Okay, and Lyon was here. General Lyon was here about the same time. That's why
the Lyon was long gone. Lyon had killed in Wilson's Creek.
Oh, that's right, at Wilson Creek,
But martial law was declared here. There was martial law for about 18 months.
Okay.
And so he was here for that period of time, and then he left here and went to another part of the Civil War and worked in as kind of like a mule skinner. I mean, he did a lot of civilian jobs during his time. And then after the war, he came back here at the very end of the war, as a lot of people did. So that was one of the big influxes in Springfield's population, was right after the Civil War. A lot of people that had come here as refugees during the war, who were Northern sympathizers, stayed on. And then a lot of people that had left during the war came back.
Was this still considered a crossroads?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
This was a crossroads for everything. So there was a lot of people here, most of them Civil War veterans and so on. I mean, this was the very edge of the West. This was where rough met smooth, right here. Okay. So there was a lot of gambling, a lot of carousing, drinking, and so on.
Both of those cultures coming
together. And so Hickok was one of those brash young people. And there was another young man named Davis Tutt, who had a very similar background, except on the other side. While Hickok had been an abolitionist and had fought for the Union, Tutt had been a secessionist and fought for the Confederacy. But they're very similar in their approach to life.
Okay.
And they gambled quite a bit together, supposedly for friends for a period of time, and then had a falling out over a couple of different issues. But ultimately, the big problem was over a gambling debt where Hickok owed Tutt some money. Tutt said it was $35. Hickok said it was $25. After the kind of a heated discussion about that, Tutt took Hickok's watch, very like the one that's here in the case, and took it as collateral for the debt and said, "I'll give this back to you when you pay me."
All right.
And Hickok threatened him and said, "Don't ever let me see you wearing that watch." Now, these two young hotheads, one thing led to another. And so Hickok got word that Tutt was going to walk onto the square wearing the watch. And so Tutt walked into the square from here in the northwest corner. Hickok walked into the square from South Street, and they pulled their guns and fired. And with that pulling of their weapons, it became the very first gunfight in the Old West.
I was going to ask that because this is an actual factual gunfight. This isn't any kind of made up.
No, not two guys where they're going back to back and taking 10 paces and turning and shooting. This is two guys walking into the square and pulling their guns and shooting.
Now, part of that shooting, we talked about it a little bit earlier. Hickok must have been one dead eye to make that shot.
It's about 85 yards. And to be able to do that, to be able to shoot almost the length of a football field with a .36 caliber cap and ball pistol, is pretty amazing. I mean, I would be lucky to hit the square, let alone hit a person in it.
Now, of course, you know, Wild Bill buried up in Deadwood, but the distaff side of that duo, which is Davis Tutt, you can find his grave right here in Springfield.
He's buried in Maple Park, and actually he was moved to Maple Park. He was originally buried in the old city cemetery down here on South Street.
Right.
And his half-brother, Lewis Tutt, who was the son of his father, of Davis Tutt's father, and a slave who was half African American.
Yeah.
Was very well to do after the war and was very successful here in Springfield. And he was one of the first African Americans to have a burial plot in Maple Park. And he moved Davis Tutt's body from the old city cemetery to Maple Park.
Amazing. And you can find markers right on the square that tell you about this. And of course, you can visit the History Museum on the square and learn a lot more. Think you knew all about Wild Bill Hickok? There's a whole lot more out there. Find it here at the museum.